I mean, because I was teaching in a vintage guitar shop, I just didn't care about vintage guitars. I played all the 59 Les Pauls and all the 50 Strats, and it was like most of them are horrible. And it
Sounds familiar though, right?
yeah, it turned me off to the whole vintage market, and I said, I'm just going to build brand new guitars, and just it's all about the fingers.
You have to honor your creative impulses, or you slip into depression.
What's up? How's it going? I don't know if you saw this, but there's a guy over in England. His name is Rob Chapman. They call him Chappers. He got online, made a video. He's made a bunch of videos, but he made a video about how he has played many guitars, many guitars. And he's come to some conclusions after seeing or playing this many guitars. This is Chappers right here. Now, it's interesting because this guy, first of all, he's a good guitar player. He can play guitar, okay? He owns his own guitar company, which means that he has been involved somewhat in the manufacturing process. Whether that's, checking boxes and saying, I want this body and this, net, whatever. I don't know how in depth it goes, but he has a brand of guitars. And he tests guitars online. I think he tests them for Andertons or something, or, he has played a bunch of guitars. As he put it, he's played 4,000 guitars. Okay? It's a lot of guitars. And he has come to some conclusions. And one of the conclusions that he came to was vintage guitars aren't that great, and modern guitars are better, which is something I've been saying. That's why I'm showing you the video, because I've been saying that. I've been saying, look, these old guitars, they're good, they're cool, but they're not that great. They're not worth $725,000. I'm sorry, this guitar is not worth $725,000 when you get down to what you're using a guitar for. Now, there's a historical significance to this guitar. I agree. There's a rarity issue with this guitar. I agree. But when you get down to why you are playing guitar, okay? And a lot of these guys that own these $725,000, $450,000 guitars, they don't even play them. They're not even played. They're sitting in a vault, collecting money. Not even played. So, as far as you go, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to play guitar and make a sound with that guitar. So what Rob's saying is you don't have to spend a whole bunch of money on a vintage guitar to get a good sound. And modern day guitars are better. So, you have to give these vintage guys credit, because for some reason in the modern day, people think vintage is better. Vintage sounds better. And one reason why is because of the price, because these prices are so high that we just think it's better when something costs more, which is normal, right? So in other words, like you have a car, here's a car, 15 grand. Here's the same car, 30 grand. Next car, 75 grand. Which one's better? You're going to think the one that's 75 grand is better. Here's an oven. This oven's $200. This oven's $1,000. This oven's $2,000. Which oven is better? The $2,000 oven. Because with production, with cost of material, with labor, with these types of things added in, a product usually costs more. That's better. Better materials, took longer to make. It's made better because they're doing certain things there that make it better. Therefore, it costs more money. Now, if you take that and you put it into vintage guitars, well, I've got a guitar that's $2,000. I've got a guitar that's $4,000. I've got a guitar that's $300, and I got a guitar that's $725,000. Which one's better? Your mind just goes, well, boy, that guitar is $725,000. Man, that must be one hell of a guitar. Now, in terms of the look, it looks okay. Decent looking guitar. But what we're doing is we're playing these guitars. We're getting a sound out of them. So the most important thing about any electric guitar is the sound. And what Rob is saying is, a modern day guitar is better.
Vintage guitars.
Modern guitars are made better than vintage guitars. He says it point blank. This is a guy that's played 4,000 guitars, and he says, including bursts, he's played bursts. He's played all kinds of vintage guitars. He's played 4,000 probably plus guitars at this point.
Still want to own vintage guitars.
He still wants to own vintage guitars, though, because there's a nostalgia with the vintage guitars for some people.
Well, that's a stupid year because I was born in 75.
I know it's a stupid year because I was born in 75. Now, why is he saying that? Because when you get on these forums, right, these people love to bash 1970s guitars. They love to, they call Gibson the Norlin era. This one, the corporation owned Gibson, and these Gibsons are horrible. They're terrible. They're the worst ones in the world. They don't play well. They're too heavy. They're two-piece body. They're made by some corporation that just cared about profit. Guess what? In 1957, the Gibson Corporation cared about profit, and it was owned by I think Chicago Music Supply, Chicago Music something. It was owned by a corporation. Gibson was owned by a corporation in the 1950s and made profit. The 1958 guitar was produced, electric guitar was produced for profit. The 59 Holy Grail guitar was produced on an assembly line by factory workers for profit. But this Norlin era guitar is horrible, terrible. And then with the Strats, all I heard, okay, in the 1980s and 1990s was, oh, those 70s Strats are garbage. Those 1970s Strats, they're terrible. They're horrible. Oh, yeah, Fender had moved out, and Fender had sold out the company in 65, and by 1970, they were basically out of the picture, and this corporation had taken over Fender, CBS, and they were making the worst guitars. They had a 3-bolt neck on them, and they had big headstock, and they were just horrible guitars. That's all I heard. You have to get a 1965 or before, okay? And by the way, I had a 1959 Strat when I was 20 years old, okay? I played these guitars too. I played a lot of Stratocasters. A 1959 Stratocaster is much more common than a 1959 Burst, okay? I had my first 1959 Stratocaster when I was 20 years old, okay? And I knew then, after I played it for about 6 to 8 months, I got, this guitar ain't all that. I got it because Stevie Ray Vaughan said he played a 59, so I had to get a 59. I had to get it because Stevie Ray Vaughan had one. And when I got it and I played it, I was like, man, this thing plays like garbage and it sounds like garbage. And I sold it in about 8 months, okay, for a loss, by the way, for a loss. I didn't make money on that guitar. I lost money on that guitar. Anyway, All I heard was in the 80s and 90s, you have to get 65 and before. You can't get between 65 and 70. Man, okay. But 70, 71, 72, no, garbage, 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 garbage. But now, when these vintage guys want to get vintage prices for the 1970s guitar of $3,200, of $3,000, of $4,000. Oh, those aren't those guitars from the 70s just so great? They have a 3-bolt neck on them. Isn't that cool? It's really innovative. On the big headstock, just like Jimmy had. Remember? Isn't that cool? I mean, it's real nostalgic. And you grew up kind of listening to your dad play one. Aren't those cool? Aren't those cool guitars? It's $4,000. In the 80s and 90s, this guitar was like $300. This guitar right here was $100. You couldn't even sell this guitar for $300. When this guitar, this Olympic White 76 Strat was in the 80s, when it was $300, this Antigua guitar was $100 because nobody wanted it. Oh, isn't that the coolest color ever? Now we want 2750. They want more for this guitar, this piece of garbage guitar they trashed in the 1980s and 90s. It's the worst. 1970s are the worst guitars ever. They're terrible. They're post CBS, which is horrible. They're terrible. Vintage guys are all saying that. All the vintage guys are saying that. But now, when the vintage guys want to make money off them, oh, aren't they cool? Isn't that 3-bolt neck cool? Then that reminds you of like your dad was playing it, and it's just they're so cool. Look, it's $5,000. Yeah, they're cool. They're so cool. Now they're cool. Now it's 48. Now it's $5,000. That's double, almost triple what a top of the line production Stratocaster is right now. You can get a top of the line production Stratocaster for what, $2,000, $1,800, $2,000. That will blow this guitar out of the water. Not because this guitar is a bad guitar, but because they're making guitars so well right now. A top of the line Stratocaster will blow any of these guitars out of the water. And not because, like I said, not because this is a bad made guitar, because right now they're making the best guitars they've ever made. They're making great guitars right now. $3,250 for a natural 77 Stratocaster. Probably didn't play that well. Probably didn't sound that good. So that's why Rob's saying 75 is a stupid year, because the Norland Les Paul was out and people love to trash that. The 3-bolt neck Strat was out. People love to trash that until they want to sell it. And then it's so cool. But yeah, isn't it cool though? Don't you want it? It's only $5,000. Anyway, he keeps going.
But I want a 75 Taylor Les Paul Strat. That's my goal. But
so he wants to get his birth year guitars. You can't blame the guy. Like I said, it's nostalgic.
Modern guitars are better, honestly, from a guy who's played a lot of incredible vintage, fretless wonders and crazy stuff.
See, he's saying modern guitars are better. And he's played some incredible vintage guitars. So this guy is not just playing sloppy, pull it out of the basement, wrapped in a garbage bag guitars. He's playing very well maintained, very good, very highly sought after vintage guitars. And he's telling you modern day guitars are better.
And high end, even medium stuff. I've played guitars that were manufactured, 6 years ago, but
now, this is the rub right here. He says he's played guitars that were manufactured 6 years ago, that were set up properly and played better than a $500,000 guitar. And guess what he's talking about? Guess what? The only guitar in the world that would garner $500,000. The Gibson Les Paul Sunburst guitar from 1959, 58, 57.
For maybe $300 that played better than guitars that were vintage and cost $500,000. This is...
See, he's saying he played a guitar that was maybe six years old, made 6 years ago, cost $300, was well set up, and it played better than a guitar that was $500,000. Think about that. And you know, when Ted McCarty, who was over all this era of Gibson, his name's Ted McCarty, he was in charge of Gibson. Les Paul had made the original Les Paul, I'll say Lester Paul, made the original Les Paul guitar in 1941. He brought it to Gibson in 43, 44, 45. They said, no, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make the guitar. You know why? Ted McCarty has said why they didn't make the guitar. He said it is so easy to make an electric guitar. A solid body electric guitar is so easy to make that I didn't want to make the solid body electric because I thought everybody was going to copy me. Everybody was going to copy Gibson. And then there were so many little guitar companies that would pop up making this guitar because it's so easy to make that we'd go out of business. We'd lose a whole bunch of money on the project. So the very guy who came out with this guitar under him, Gibson came out with this guitar, this 59, this incredible guitar, right? He said point blank, the electric guitar is so easy to make that I was scared to put out a solid body electric because everybody would copy me, everybody would do it, and then we go out of business. And that's what Rob is saying. After playing 4,000 guitars, he's saying, Ted, you're right. You can buy a guitar for $300 right now that somebody made and somebody set up correctly, and it plays better than a $500,000 guitar.
That played better than guitars that were vintage and cost $500,000.
See, so this is why I have a problem when people say this about this guitar. This guitar sold, by the way, for $425,000 in like a day. They put out this video of RJ Ronquillo playing this guitar 4 days ago, right? And I watched the video. I'm going to do a sound comparison with this video too. The guitar sounds good. It's not about sounding guitar, but it's not the greatest guitar ever made. And people say, well, no, nobody says it's the greatest guitar ever made. They're trying to defend it. Oh, nobody's saying that. Yeah, they are. Right here. The Bursts are considered by many to be the best electric guitars ever produced. Okay? Commenters, people who want to bash me for saying somebody's saying these are the greatest guitars ever made. They've been saying this for decades. And I've been hearing it and just going, well, okay, guys, whatever. But I'm sick of hearing it. I'm tired of hearing it. I'm sick of it. And I'm glad that Rob stood up and said, hey, guys, I played 4,000 guitars. I've played old guitars. I've played vintage guitars. They ain't that great. You can buy a $300 decent guitar in the modern day, set it up, and it plays as good and sound as good as something you're paying $500,000 for. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for finally standing up and saying something about it. Like I've been saying about it. I've been saying this for a couple years now. If you watch some of my older videos, I've been saying, man, the vintage guitars ain't that great. And they're certainly not worth the money. And the thing is, man, we have the proof that these aren't the best electric guitars ever produced. We have the proof. We have the proof that these are not the best electric guitars ever produced. So if you said, well, it's a 59, it's very rare, they only made 500 of them, okay, check. But don't say it's the greatest guitar ever made, because it's not. All right, guys, that's it. I'll see you next time.